Okay, welcome everyone to our first Hot Politics Lab meeting this season. And as you can see, I'm together with a few other people in this room, I have to look into the camera. There it is. There's a new camera suddenly, and so we're slowly moving to a hybrid situation, but we're kind of need to figure out the wheel all again, and so we're pressing a few buttons and hoping everything will be okay here. But please, give us any feedback if the sound quality can be improved. Hey, it's great to see so many of you this Friday afternoon. And we have an exciting set of talks coming up for you. You can see them all on our website. And today we're going to start with Pere-Lluís and David from Pere-Lluís is from Sapienza University of Rome, and David is a postdoc at the University of Amsterdam, our university, but he's in a different department than we are. He's in the Department of Psychology. And we actually had David already a few months ago. Well, no, that's more than a few months ago. It's more than a year ago. And he works on a project with Agneta Fischer, and who was at the time presenting, but she needed a little bit of help, right, David?
Yes, I remember.
So today we're going to talk about a project that is part of that larger project, and the larger project is about how should I put it? Investigating the role of populism in contemporary politics. And today we're going to have a talk that is titled Computational Approaches on Modeling Political Rhetoric. So a very exciting topic, very close to the heart of what the Hot Politics Lab does. So for those of you who are new today, we'll have approximately a 20-minute presentation by both Pere-Lluís and David, I assume. And then we have time for questions. And so the questions can be written into the Q&A box. So there's in the middle of your Zoom bar, there's this Q&A thing, and you can type your questions there. Bert will moderate that discussion. So he will read out the questions, and Pere-Lluís and David will then answer. Okay, so without further delays, I want to yield the virtual space to David and give him the opportunity to present his work.
Thanks a lot, Gijs, for this very nice, lovely introduction of both of us and our research projects. My name is David. As Gijs already mentioned, I work at the Amsterdam Interdisciplinary Center of Emotion, which is affiliated with the Department of Psychology. So basically this presentation is about summarizing two different studies we conducted at the intersection of social psychology and natural language processing in collaboration with colleagues from the University of Amsterdam. So the question which has been kind of keeping all of us somehow busy, what is populism? As we all know, and this is something, this is nothing new, I will probably elaborate here. Populism is characterized by the society being divided into two homogeneous and antagonistic groups. So this refers basically this classic basically essence of populism. This refers to the opposition between the pure people and the corrupt elites, the so-called Manichaean dichotomy, or basically the us versus them rhetoric. So in the political realm, it is described as being a tool for the people to achieve the common good or the popular will. Ordinary people, often portrayed by populist politicians as the in-group, are basically or supposedly being threatened by various out-group members. And this is what we call in social identity the existential identity threat. The main goal of populism remains to boost in-group identification by dividing basically the society through prejudice, xenophobia in case of right-wing populism, and potential acts of aggression. So through different communication platforms, populism deploys a rhetoric that revolves around that particular social identity and the us versus them argumentation. So what is the connection? What we were interested in these studies was what is the connection between populism, social identity, and various emotions, and how can we actually detect these complex interrelations? As we all know, we live in times of rapid changes, and current rapid changes across the globe and our societies make people feel uncertain about their self and identity. And one way to reduce this self uncertainty is by identifying with social groups, which provide a defined identity, associated normative beliefs, and so-called behavioral prescriptions. So, by the same token, extremist groups and extremist attitudes with strong and directive leadership, for example, populist parties or autocratic systems, and ideological heterocentric belief systems which prescribe group normative behavior become a very attractive source of identification. So we can say that highly entitative groups have become so popular in compared to mainstream parties because such defined prescriptive identities are way more effective. For example, identities that echo populist ideology, conspiracy theories, and victim narratives are very common nowadays across populist parties in many different countries. So we can say that populism is in a way as a means of self-uncertainty reduction. Group identification through self-categorization has become an effective way to reduce, as I said, the self-uncertainty. This is also nothing new to most of you guys, of course, that populists use emotion eliciting appeals instead of rational arguments. This has been shown in various studies, and anxiety seems to be the primary emotion, a core element in populist reasoning. Anxiety is the appraisal of uncertainty and lack of control, and the pattern of appraisals, the so-called correlational themes related to anxiety, is threat. In times of social changes and uncertainty, people concerned about loss of values and their social identity become attracted to reduce this anxiety, to reduce these negative emotions by, as I said, group identification. So populist attitudes are, our research, at least recent research, shows that populist attitudes are better predicted by negative emotions than previously taught by socioeconomic factors. Another aspect of that interrelation between populism and social identity emotions is that media effects evoke hostility and construction of social identities, such as in in-groups and out-groups. So they are part of that complex dynamics. And this is called the concept of media populism, actually. So political discourse is, as we know, is essential in shaping public opinion. And emotions have been shown to be part of populist rhetoric and crucial for information processing and in shaping public opinion among citizens in different countries across the globe. So populist rhetoric, as I said, revolves around social identity and the us versus them argumentation and rhetoric. So again, this is also nothing new. Most of you guys have conducted research in that field. Populist communication and language is successful in inducing communication. And again, social identity and socioeconomic factors are primary indicators of populist growth. And we can also differentiate maybe very slightly between right-wing populism and left-wing populism, while right-wing populism is characterized by fear, resentment, anger, and hate. And left-wing populism is more associated with shame and guilt. So why did we all that? Why did I elaborate on that? Because there has been actually an increased interest in modeling political discourse within computational linguistics and natural language processing community in tasks such as political bias and misinformation detection, among others. But there has been actually lack of computational detection of these different aspects of populism. So what is the connection between populism, social identity, emotions? I think it's very clear, but how can we detect, how can we actually develop joint models to detect these connections within textual data? This was basically the main goal of our two studies. So as I said, emotions have been vastly explored, however, either as classification tasks, for example, by using Ekman's basic emotion scale, or regression only, the so-called VAD model or valence arousal dominance model. As models have become more advanced and sophisticated during the last years, more complex tasks are tackled, such as detection of metaphors across political discourses, for example. So metaphor is insofar important that metaphor-rich and emotion-eliciting communication strategies are omnipresent in political rhetoric. However, computational modeling, as I said, of these kind of discourses have not been incorporated yet. So in our first study, what we did was to create joint models of metaphor, emotion, and political rhetoric. The model architecture was based on Roberta, which is basically a robustly optimized BERT approach, a common approach in natural language processing, and we combined it with multitask learning, MTL. I don't want to go into details too far already, but we could basically improve metaphor detection by combining Roberta with multitask learning. Later, we can provide you guys more details in a Q&A. And why this is so important is that emotions and political affiliations and political perspectives seem to have a role in how metaphors are used. So just skip here to the next slide. So this is what you guys see here is the Roberta model for our first study, in which basically the main goal was to detect metaphors and emotions in the context of political discourses. So this is basically schematics. We elaborate on that probably later. The time constraints we have. So maybe this is worth mentioning for the first study that we have some examples of the political perspective and framing where, you know, the multitask learning was included and helped the prediction. Noteworthy is, for example, how framing metaphors such as the airtight case here, you see it in the examples, or Boeing too, are detected by the metaphor model and lead to a correct prediction. As an additional insight, we also get the predictions for the emotions present in the Facebook posts we used here in our first study. And we can see that some results also tie with the political theory of emotions such as pessimism and sadness being more present in democratic posts or Facebook posts covering the views of Democrats in the US. While anger or fear were more prominent in the Republican Facebook posts. So I very briefly wanted to mention that this is the publication resulting from that study. And so we were actually more interested in how we can basically model political discourse in the context of emotions and populist rhetoric, and also considering the social identity or social group dynamics. Because as I had elaborated earlier, there is a lack of training data, and existing data sets are either superficial or of small size for computational modeling. Due to the flexible nature of populism, annotating populist rhetoric and textual data has been also challenging. You know, we have only only very few small scale analysis by populism experts, but no like joint model computational models. And to the best of our knowledge, our research includes the first large scale computational models tackling the simultaneous detection of populist attitudes, emotions, and social and textual data. So very briefly, what we investigated was the relationship between populist mindset and social groups and a range of emotions typically associated with these. And we set a baseline. For two attitudes. And we basically presented a set of multitask learning models that leverage and demonstrate the importance of emotions and group identification as auxiliary tasks. So this is a differentiation, the main task and auxiliary task, which Pere-Lluís can elaborate on. So we did experiment in a multitasking framework, jointly modeling, supportive versus discriminatory attitudes towards a group and the identity of the group. And we demonstrated basically that joint model leads to significant improvements in detection of populist attitudes. So we used Reddit comments because we think social media, has become a big vector and transmitter for exchanging and expanding populist rhetoric and extremist political views, while other data domains such as party manifestos and political speeches have already been explored extensively from colleagues and populist researchers. So Reddit was chosen as a data source due to its nature also as a news aggregator, as well as being structured with strong social identity dynamics. The design of our annotation scheme and dataset was, I think this is very important to emphasize, inspired by these aforementioned links between populist rhetoric, social identity dynamics, and emotions. So our dataset consists of comments posted on Reddit that explicitly mention a social group and are in response to news articles across the political spectrum. Our data collection was restricted to 6 social groups that are the most common targets of populism in the US, UK, and across Europe, namely immigrants, refugees, Muslims, Jews, liberals, and conservatives. So this is a brief overview of our Reddit data collection. We probably, it makes more sense to get back to that overview later if necessary. So we decided for Ekman's model for basic emotions and extended it basically from 6 to 12 emotions with a balanced set of positive and negative emotions. And we know from previous research that these are basically the 12 emotions associated with populism and mindsets. And provide basically a brief description of each emotion to the annotators. And this description was inspired by the concept of correlational themes. So specific appraisal patterns, basically correlational themes are specific appraisal patterns that characterize emotions. So a pattern of appraisals is referred to a correlational theme, and these are central, therefore, harm and benefit that underlines each of the positive emotions. A first level question basically asks to classify the main sentiment of the Reddit comment as positive, negative, or neutral. And if positive, for example, is selected, up to 2 positive emotions could be basically chosen between gratitude, happiness, hope, pride, relief, and sympathy. And if negative was selected, up to 2 negative emotions could be chosen between anger, fear, contempt, sadness, disgust, and guilt. We conducted the annotation on Amazon MTurk. So also important to mention is that to capture this rhetoric annotators, what kind of languages contain towards a specific social group. So, and they have basically or analytical but not discriminatory, supportive or favorable, or just neutral. And this is how it looks like basically. We have the options. And then this is basically the first level. The previous graphic was the second level, so they can select the emotions and they see basically the
David, your connection. Oh,
yes.
So it seems we're losing David a bit. Can you hear me well?
Very well, yeah.
Hello?
I can hear you guys.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I'm already wrote
yeah,
yet.
we hear you.
Okay. Sorry for interruption. Must be Wi-Fi connection. So yes, I think it's time for Pere-Lluís to take over for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, hi, I will just go briefly over the second part that regards more to the modeling. As I said before, I'm Pere-Lluís. Wait, I will share my screen just to avoid any delay. I think you can see my screen now. Can anybody confirm? Okay, nice. So we already saw how the annotation procedure worked. And basically what we did is we gathered all the annotations from mTurk, and we had 8 annotators annotate each of the comments. And then we used this tool called CrowdTruth, which was developed in Amsterdam, which looks for aggregating the disagreement between annotators, because normally, especially in NLP tasks or computational tasks, when we annotate, we regard disagreement as an incorrect labeling of the data. Let's say if somebody disagrees, it means that one of them is wrong. And especially in such a subjective task, we don't think that disagreement came from a wrong annotation. In many cases, it came just from the nuance of the task, because 4 labels are not always as representative of the reality. Therefore, by using this CrowdTruth tool, instead of annotating our data set as a discrete one with 4 options, we obtain what is a scale, what we label as the us versus them scale, which is based on the questions that David described, which goes from supportive to more discriminatory. As we see, this is the plot bar of the comments that were labeled in the data set, and they are slightly skewed towards the critical side, as internet interactions. We're all familiar with the internet, so yeah, of course, it all skews towards the negative side, but it is how it is. Then, since we have the comments splitted by social groups, we can also look at how these histograms are shaped for each of the groups, and we see different behaviors. It's worth taking into account. This is taken from Reddit posts, and also in a very specific time periods which are defined in the paper. So that also may explain why we see differences in how conservatives or liberals are perceived, or the other social groups. Then again, these comments were in reply to somebody sharing a news piece for which we had a label given by All Sites, which is a website that gives news bias label to each source of the publication. So we can also split our comments regarding to the media bias of the article that sparked this conversation and led to the comment that was annotated. We saw that there was a significant difference, especially for the right-wing biased news articles, which led to a more skewed histogram, a more skewed scale towards the discriminatory side. Finally, since annotators were also asked for emotions, we do get also this split of the data according to each emotion. And again, maybe no surprises here. The negative emotions are more correlated with those more discriminatory comments, while positive emotions correlate with supportive ones. Perhaps more interestingly is the fact that the 2 negative emotions, such as sadness and guilt, were way less skewed towards discriminatory side and rather more critical when compared to other ones such as anger, contempt, disgust, or fear. Finally, we see here a correlation matrix using a heat map, where you can see how the different emotions correlate to the us versus them scale. Finally, this is a bit more technical, but it is how do we decide to use the data that we just obtained from the annotation procedure in order to predict or inference from raw text the level of us versus them scale, like to predict the us versus them scale when we are giving a raw text. And similarly to what David explained before, when we were modeling together emotions and metaphors with political discourse in the aims of helping the model understand better political discourse, here we have the same interaction, but instead of using metaphors and emotions, here we use emotion detection and group identification. Adding these tasks to the model help the model understand better the context from which they come and predict better this value of the us versus them scale. The model is very similar to the one presented at the beginning. I won't get into too much detail, but it uses Roberta, which is a transformer model widely used in NLP, with some specific classification heads for each of the tasks. Again, this is rather technical, and it's about the learning scheme that when one uses multitask learning, you want to give more importance to the auxiliary tasks at the beginning and then focus on your main task by the end of the training so that the model specializes on the given task, in this case, the populism detection task. Finally, here we have the table of results, for which we saw how including the extra tasks, such as emotion identification or group identification, led to an improvement of performance when identifying this us versus them scale. And what was also very interesting was that when we added both together, the model saw a significant improvement when compared to any of the other baselines. This means that when the model is able to be biased towards identifying both emotions and groups, it uses the information that this inherent bias introduces to the model to perform better on the given task. It's also very important to see that the difference here is not that we input to the model which emotion or which group that the comment talks about, but rather the model itself is predicting both the us versus them scale, as well as identifying the group and the emotion behind the comment. So the model only sees the raw text at inference time. So we also took a look at the results and saw where was multitask learning helping and where was the model making mistakes. As expected, the improvement came from comments that had a high emotional balance, as well as those who included very targeted language towards a certain group. While the errors came from comments that were also very emotionally ambiguous, let's say, or very using different types of language, maybe more aggressive language, but being supportive towards a group, when they reference more than one group at the same time, or simply errors that come from the annotation process. It's important also to pinpoint that these errors were common across all the baselines, the single task model that was trained only on the populism detection task, as well as the multitask learning ones. Here are some examples of some comments and how multitask learning interacted with the predictions for these comments. This can be found in the paper, and if anybody is curious, I recommend to go take a look and read them in detail. And then to finish, what we did, we also wanted to look at how the model was incorporating the multitask learning process, the multiple tasks, and see if it changed how the model shaped the representation that it learned for each comment. So again, this is a bit technical, but what we did is when you use these deep learning models for natural language processing, you obtain a hidden representation that is the representation of the comment that the model learns before classifying it or regressing it into a value. This is a 700 dimension vector, which we reduce to 2 dimensions in order to plot in these TSNA plots that you see here in the screen. And this is how the model is transforming each comment across the different layers of the model. So at the last layer, the 12th layer, is the representation of the model just before classifying or regressing it. And as you can see, the model is putting them in a linear fashion from bottom to top, according to the scale of the us versus them scale. So more red comments are more discriminatory comments, and more blue comments are supportive comments. And more or less in a linear fashion, of course, with some errors, it correlates to this us versus them scale, how the model plots this information. This is for the single task learning model that didn't see any information at training time about the group identification or the emotion identification. On the other hand, when we introduce the extra tasks, the model learns to implement this, again, in a non-direct manner, into the learning representation of this text. So here we see how in the main task, and more clearly in the group's specific layer, we see how there's clusters for the comments, and they're not now correlated to the us versus them scale, but rather to each social group which the comment refers to. And in the last layer of the model, we see how we have these clusters for each social group, but also this distribution of the us versus them scale with red comments and blue comments. But here, instead of being a linear distribution, is radial, and we see that more neutral comments are concentrated in the center, those with pale colors, while more darker colors, more discriminatory and supportive comments seem to be more close together in this space. What we understand that is happening here is that the model is learning together to represent together those models that have a higher emotional value, because they can be either supportive or discriminatory, and put them closer together in this embedding space, but having a better prediction because it incorporates this information that was not available before. This is how the same plot, but showing the emotions of each comment. And as you can see, this intuition kind of gets confirmed by the fact that towards the center, we find more neutral comments than those in yellow. Okay, sorry if it was a bit quick and these are a bit complex explanations, but I hope it was clear. And again, you can look at the paper for a more detailed explanation, or just feel free to ask anything about what David or I have explained during the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pere-Lluís. This is a very interesting stuff. For those of you new here today, or those of you who know how to do this, just a reminder, please type your questions to David and Pere-Lluís in the Q&A box, and then I can read them out loud, and Pere-Lluís and David can actually read along, and then they can decide who answers the difficult questions, or they call in Agneta as an additional presenter, discuss it. I don't know if she's here today, but let me start with asking a question while other people might be thinking about their questions. So I like the descriptive nature of what you describe here. At least this is, I mean, descriptive in a positive way, right? You seem to have created models that can uncover patterns related to populism that are definitely not so easy to grasp with other types of research strategies. But could you tell me now a little bit, what did we now learn substantively about populism?
Hi, just before we continue, I think David is trying to access the Zoom, but it says it's locked. Probably he had some connection issues. So, but regarding of what we learned about populism, again, I will do my best in answering this because, again, I'm more like the tech guy. Yeah. But I can say what I learned about populism. So basically, I think what this showed was a shift towards how, when we introduce this bias about the group identification or the emotion detection, normally when we have models that predict something, we want to avoid bias, right? We want to avoid saying that if there's this group mentioned, then by default there's this prediction, which of course you don't want to happen, especially if you are, I don't know, moderating comments online, for instance, that may have some very heavy populist content. On the other hand, we also show that including these tasks helps the model predict better. So understanding the specifics about groups or the specifics about how emotions work in text will help the model understand better this populist content. So again, I don't want to go into make assumptions, but I think that bias is a double-edged sword. And I think if we learn something here is that it can be used also to understand better how specific populism can be for each of the groups. So something that may be extremely populist when you're talking about one group may not be even discriminatory or critical for another one, maybe even supportive. I don't know. I cannot think of specific examples now, but I think that was, at least from my side, the main takeaway of the project.
Great. This is just a stimulation to type your questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to ask the questions that I have, which might or might not be interesting for those of you listening. So if you have a question, remember there are no stupid questions, right? So I have a clarifying question, Pere-Lluís. How easy, suppose that I want to do this in another context, how easy is this to transfer this to, say, the Netherlands or Italy? Is it how scalable is it, or is this now trained and validated for English language and that's it?
Yeah, so far, like, we had limited resources, let's say, so we focused on English comments in Reddit. Multilinguality in NLP is a challenging task, and it's still open. So we use models that are trained on English, but it's a growing part of NLP to have models that understand not just English, or that are not just focused on, I don't know, I take some Dutch text, I translate it to English, and then I use my English model, but rather having a model that does it all. And so by the time we started this, they were very limited, but within 2 years, it's crazy the amount of things that have happened in NLP. And there's models that can understand many languages. Then again, you will need the data for the task. We annotated the data in English. So what I can assume is that if you had a way of finding, as we did, comments from Reddit or from other, I don't know, maybe you look at Dutch newspapers and their comments, normally people that engage with online newspapers are very passionate about their opinions. So I'm sure that's a good source of text. It can be a bit expensive to annotate, but there's also other ways of working around it, to train the model in English, but then evaluating it on maybe the Dutch data. But by using a multilingual model, it's not only focused on English. I think one of the other challenges here is the domain adaptation. This is Reddit, and it has a very specific way of people communicating with each other. We think that these models work well in Reddit, but we're not sure how they will translate to other data. I think something like Twitter will probably have a similar behavior, and this model will work, but maybe we translate this to, I don't know, transcripts of political discourses, it will be a totally different context. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I don't know if that answers the question. But...
Yes, thanks. Okay, and there's some questions from the audience. First, let's do the online questions. And Matthijs, I promise not to forget you. But the first question is from Erik Grunenberg. Hi, Pere-Lluís. I might have missed it, but what kind of computational resources were necessary to train these models? And what was the training time like?
I don't remember out of my head. I think the details are also on the papers, but we use the UVA cluster for master students that I had available, and that's very powerful. However, for Roberta, if you're patient, for the model that we used, I think a single GPU on a somewhat powerful computer would be enough, especially because the data is not, the data set is not huge. So multitask learning definitely puts a toll on the model at time of training, because it's an extra task, an extra loss to propagate through the model. However, it wasn't anything insane. And hi, David, welcome back.
All right, David is back. All right, the next question is from Diamantis Petropoulos Petalas from the Hot Politics Lab at the University of Amsterdam. His question is as follows. Anxiety was incorporated as appraisal of uncertainty and lack of control. Can you give some examples? And how about classifying uncertainty appraisals? Did your model take into account different levels of uncertainty appraisals? For example, this was perhaps a rather poor decision.
So I don't know if David wants to answer this one, as he knows more specifically about anxiety. I can answer from the model side and the annotation procedure. Basically, the questions were very discrete to the annotators. So when we ask about emotions, they just had to select up to 2 of each type, negative or positive, or the option of giving neutral. So when we model them, they're discrete values on the data set. And the only way that uncertainty plays a role here is that you have comments that at prediction time you get how uncertain the model is about that emotion being present in the text, which could be used further. But in our case, we didn't go much further than that.
David, do you want to answer at the theoretical level?
Well, I mean, when it comes to, I mean, this was obviously a first attempt to do this with these 12 emotions, 6 positive, 6 negative, and so this was also quite uncertain for us, so to speak. How do we, what annotation quality do we expect? There was a lot of forth and back while we were designing and running pilots during the MTurk annotation procedure. But this is an excellent question for future research. I don't have a clear answer to that. It's an excellent question.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Tobias Rohrbach, University of Fribourg and the University of Amsterdam. Really impressive models. I'm curious, what are the next steps building upon this? David, that seems like a question for you.
When it comes to the NLP research, I think the multi-language the MNLP would be the next step. So, considering the multi-language diversity, which is the field Pere-Lluís is seeking and studying and researching on during his PhD. From our perspective, from the social psychological, social scientific perspective, I think it gives an excellent insight into the interrelations between social identity, emotions, and political rhetoric and populist attitudes. Future research could use these results to replicate a similar model maybe for other languages, but also maybe considering other social media data. In addition to Reddit, I can imagine Twitter or Facebook could be interesting sources of data.
Cool, thanks. Next question is from Tom Hackenberg, who is this semester an intern at the Hot Politics Lab, and also, now I need to say it correct, Tom, are you an alumni of the Department of Communication, or you still need to graduate? Anyways, an excellent student that we have the pleasure of hosting this semester. And he had a couple of questions. One was answered already, but the question that Tom asked is about validity. So Tom wonders, where should we apply the model to test its validity?
So I think, yeah, that's the one that was already answered. So, no, that's the first one, right? For the validity, well, when we designed the test set, of course, it's a test set that hasn't been seen by the model, and it was the one that had comments that were with the highest quality in terms of the annotation agreement. So that was one place where, of course, the model can be tested for validity. When we talk about the outside world, I think both David and I were very cautious on how this can be used. Of course, we believe in open source and we believe in open code, and we do make available the data set, but we also call for caution in how it's used in the wild. I think for now it should stay in research and I don't know, open it up, see what's wrong with it, see what the comments are, which are better or worse, how they can be used. Any criticism, any construction upon it, that's completely welcome, but with caution. And I think his next question was how large was the corpus of annotated Reddit posts, and it was around 8,000 comments. Yeah,
great.
It was split equally per group and per news bias.
Okay, thank you, Pere-Lluís. The next question is from Kobe Hackenberg, which, if Twitter informed me correct, works with Manos Tsakiris at Royal Holloway. His question is as follows. Did you find any insights regarding the specific emotional language being used in each category at the word level? In other words, when angry language was used to target a specific group, was there anything notable about specific word level trends? Might future research examine what models uncovered about the specific words playing the largest roles in constructing discursive, emotional, rhetorical categories?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And we didn't look at words on the individual level. I think it's maybe from the bias that from NLP side we have, because the old methods were dictionary based now before, and now we are moving into these contextual models that take the whole text as input, and then we kind of forget to go back to the word level and say, okay, we have the results now, let's go back and see which words were more influential for the model. So we didn't get there, but definitely is something that should be looked at. We did saw that when the language, rather than words specifically, was very concrete about the groups, it was one of the cases where incorporating group identification as one of the extra tasks helped the performance of the model. So there's definitely something there. And there's some examples in the paper about that, but we didn't do any frequency analysis in terms of the word level.
Great, thanks. Next question is from Dani Komaromi, who is also a student that is interning with us in the Hot Politics Lab this semester. And like Tom just confirmed, he is also still a student. And Dani is also about to graduate, but not yet. And again, we're very happy to have Dani with us this coming semester. And his question is as follows. Don't you think that the findings hold rather to right-wing populism than to populism in general? I feel that most of the outgroups are horizontal ones, in contrast to the vertical outgroups of leftist populists, and more related to right-wing ideology, refugees, liberals. May it be the cause behind the prevalence of negative emotions over positive ones? Samela and von Schief found that left-wing populism includes more positive emotions, mainly pride, than right-wing populism. Excellent question, if I might say.
Yeah, very good question. I will hand it to David on the more theoretical part. What I can say from my side is that definitely ideally we would have included more groups. I think that was something that we saw in retrospect, because when you think about populism, maybe we all have our biases on which comes first to mind, but there's definitely ground for like including other groups. What we tried to overcome, what we tried to do to overcome this specifically was that we sample equally from each news bias, equally from each group, so that in the hopes that we will get a balanced sample. But yeah, also Reddit can also have its own bias, right? It's a social network, so there may be there. Well, traditionally, I think it's considered more with a left bias, so there's definitely something there that if you look at another place, maybe the results will be different. So yeah, and now David can say more about the theoretical side.
Well, I definitely agree that most of our findings hold rather to right-wing populism than populism in general. I guess it's also, it comes down to the Reddit data set basically we used, also the topics that are associated with these discussions and the social groups. So it is somehow also like sampling bias involved here. But again, this was a first attempt to use joint modeling and create these data sets, see what's actually going on there and how reliable and valid the prediction is. But I totally agree. Future research should definitely focus also on left-wing populism and also compare also data sets for left-wing and right-wing populism.
Great, thank you. Let's try the hybrid format a little bit. There's also a question from Matthijs Roodduin, who is in a university premise in Amsterdam and has the right to speak up himself. So Matthijs, do you want to ask your question yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, David and Pere-Lluís. A very interesting study. I have a conceptual question. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts about this. I really like this link between populism and social identities. But I was also wondering, when I think of social identities, I think of very deep-lying identities, right? About gender, about ethnicity, about religion. But when we talk about populism, to what extent is that a very deep-lying identity? I can imagine, I mean, it is, of course, very emotional. People are angry towards politicians. There's a lot of contempt, anxiety, maybe. But I can imagine that it disappears like after 5 minutes. So to what extent is it really like a deep-lying identity? I can imagine that there is identification, but to what extent is it also a real identity?
Yeah, well, I would agree with you that we should basically differentiate these terminologies, group identification and social identity. And I think what I would add to what you just said is maybe the emotions involved in, populist attitudes and mindsets, maybe they are, separate, but still the populist mindsets are a social identity in itself. So maybe these things are, more complex than we have expected. And maybe, people can also have, very rational perspective on a variety of topics, being not emotional at all and still, vote for populist parties or support extremist groups. So this is, of course, also a possibility we have not considered in this line of research.
Great. Is there anybody else in that room that wants to?
Yeah, I had a question, Bert.
Yes, Gijs Schumacher.
And that's really, where are the elites? So an important element of populism is anti-elitism. So strong emotions, perhaps, against politicians as a whole group. How do you pick that up here?
So, well, also David knows probably more about populism. I know that in our case, we focus a lot on this us versus them dichotomy, because it kind of groups together the different aspects with populism. But yeah, maybe David can explain further. From what I gather is that anti-elitism is not only, like, of course, it's about the elites, but also depending on the type of populism, it can also be about a specific group. That's why we include this social identity aspect with the different groups.
Well, what I would add at this point is that yeah, well, we did not really focus too much on the subscales of populist attitudes, the well-established subscales used in various social scientific research, because this is not classic social scientific research. This is a methodology, basically computational modeling, and these are two methodology studies, methodological papers. So it, of course, it has, it's not, the theoretical grounding is not perfect. So we did not really dive that much into details when it comes to the subscales of populist attitudes. But I agree with you that certain elites or social groups that represent the elites should be included in such a model. But I think, yeah, we had also our limitations and priorities because of the project, because of also the resources required for the MTurk annotation. But obviously, this is relevant for future research. I totally agree.
If I may add, yeah, I think it all came to the fact that when you are annotating, you want a large amount of annotation because these models are quite data hungry. So you don't have an expert annotators that will annotate your data. You have to ask not simple questions, but at least questions that are easy to answer for them. And including the subscales would have been quite complex because you would have to teach them beforehand, and it could add more noise to the data. So we said, okay, how can we make it very specific, very narrow, so that then it can develop into a task for the model, and how can we get a loss signal basically for the model that is understandable.
Gijs, do you have a follow-up on that?
No, I think it's time to round up, right?
Yes.
So thank you very much, David and Pere-Lluís, just reading Tom's comment. This is a super interesting approach, and I couldn't agree more. And I really hope to see more of this work in the future. I think there's so many possible applications. So I'm also looking forward to meeting you in private and talk a bit more about this. And on that occasion, I will also give you the infamous Hot Politics Lab coffee mug. You don't need to share one. I will give you two. Okay. And so thanks a lot for presenting here today. And we have, like I said in the beginning, an exciting schedule ahead of us. So next week, we have Paul Stroets, who will give a talk about predicting personality scores from parliamentary speeches. And this is actually our Graduate Friday occasion, and we only have one speaker. So if you're a graduate student and you would like to present something that is relevant to our lab, please contact us because we actually have one spot left. Then the week after that, 1st of October, we have Henk van der Kolk presenting joint work with Matthijs Rodijn. And it's called Confusing Discontent, Are Populism, Political Distrust, Efficacy, and Cynicism Really So Much Different? And I can give you a peek preview to the conclusion, which is no. Then the weeks after that, 8 October, we have Hugo Mercier from Paris. Not born yesterday, Why Humans Are Less Gullible Than We Think. We have Christopher Lucas also presenting on 15th of October, More Than Words. So again, a paper on the analysis of emotions and sentiments in text. And then the 22nd of October, we have another Graduate Friday with Isabella Rabasso and Lennart Schumann giving their own separate talks. Okay, so that's it for today. It was really great to see so many of you after this summer break, and we hope to gradually welcome more and more of you back into our offline location, our hybrid location here at the University of Amsterdam. As of next week, we'll be in the common room again, the common room of the Political Science Department. And so you're welcome there to join us. But if you're from any other place in the world, please feel free to join us at the set time of free Central European time, and you're more than welcome. So hopefully see you next week, and have a good weekend.
Okay. Bye. Thank you, everyone.